Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah wa ashhadu anna Muhammadan abduhu wa rasuluh. We continue looking at the life of the Messenger of God, Muhammad sallallahu ta'ala alayhi wa ala alihi. And we reached a point in which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has now ordered the Messenger of God, sallallahu ta'ala alayhi wa ala alihi, to call openly to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We said before that he was calling sallallahu ta'ala alayhi wa ala alihi in secret for a period of 3 years. Now everything would change, and our Prophet sallallahu ta'ala alayhi wa ala alihi would openly go out and openly call people to the belief of La ilaha illallah Muhammadur Rasulullah sallallahu ta'ala alayhi wa ala alihi. And Allah revealed the ayah, فَاصْدَعْ بِمَا تُؤْمَرْ وَأَعْرِضْ عَنِ الْمُشْرِكِينَ. Proclaim that which you have been commanded to, and stay away from the polytheists. Now the Prophet sallallahu ta'ala alayhi wa ala alihi is going to enter into a new phase of being here. He's going to experience sallallahu ta'ala alayhi wa ala alihi in that early community of believers in this phase a lot of harm. Quraysh does not respond favorably to the Messenger of God sallallahu ta'ala alayhi wa ala alihi, and we're going to see that which they did to his wonderful companions ridwanullahi alayhim ajma'in. But when this ayah was revealed, the Prophet sallallahu ta'ala alayhi wa ala alihi was never one to delay a command from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. If his Lord subhanahu wa ta'ala ordered him to do something, our Prophet sallallahu ta'ala alayhi wa ala alihi right away, he did it, sallallahu ta'ala alayhi wa ala alihi. So you can imagine the Muhammadan strength, alayhi salam, to now go out and proclaim his prophethood. And he did that. He, sallallahu ta'ala alayhi wa ala alihi, he went to a mountain very close to the Kaaba, a mountain of Abu Qubais. And it's also the mountain that we're going to see in the stories of Sira, that the Prophet sallallahu ta'ala alayhi wa ala alihi pointed to the moon and it split in half when Quraysh had asked him for a sign. If you go there now in Makkah al-Mukarramah, you'll see that mountain of Abu Qubais holds the palace of the king. So right there is where he sallallahu ta'ala alayhi wa ala alihi stood, and he started to call out for all of Quraysh to come. Now you have to remember, at this time, there was no loudspeakers. There was no cell phones that someone could pick up and start texting people, hey, come meet me at such and such place. There wasn't any WhatsApp. There wasn't any Telegram. There was a voice being called out. And you imagine the scene. Remember, we're living the Seerah with the Prophet sallallahu ta'ala alayhi wa ala alihi. We're trying to imagine in our minds, in our hearts, every moment of his blessed life, alayhi salatu wasalam, and the awesomeness of the weight that was upon him. And this is one of those moments. He calls everyone to come, and whoever could come came, and whoever couldn't come sent someone as a representative to go hear what the Prophet sallallahu ta'ala alayhi wa ala alihi had to say to them. And he says, sallallahu ta'ala alayhi wa ala alihi, if I were to tell you that there was an army coming from behind this mountain to attack you, would you believe me? He starts with a very pragmatic alayhi salatu wasalam question. And they said, yes, of course. We know you as a Sadiq al-Amin. You're the truthful one. If you say it, it's true. They knew him, sallallahu ta'ala alayhi wa ala alihi, and they knew his standing amongst them. He never lied. And the Prophet sallallahu ta'ala alayhi wa ala alihi tells us that the believer does not lie. It is not from the characteristics of someone who believes in Allah and his messenger sallallahu ta'ala alayhi wa ala alihi to lie. And he, alayhi sallam, never lied. They said, yes, we know you. We know your truthfulness. We know who you are. We know your family. And he, sallallahu ta'ala alayhi wa ala alihi, says to them, then I am a warner to you to let you know about a punishment around the corner. And he tells everyone about his prophethood, sallallahu ta'ala alayhi wa ala alihi. And who was there amongst this crowd? It was his uncle Abu Lahab. Remember, we said that the Prophet sallallahu ta'ala alayhi wa ala alihi, he had 4 uncles that were alive at the time: Abu Talib, Abu Lahab, Al-Abbas, wa Hamza. And we're going to see each one of their responses to the Prophet sallallahu ta'ala alayhi wa ala alihi proclaiming his prophethood. And Abu Lahab is there. And he hears what the Prophet Sallallahu Ta'ala Alaihi Waala says. And he responds to him, Sallallahu Ta'ala Alaihi Waala, in the worst of ways. He says, أَلِهَذَا جَمَعْتَنَا تَبًّا لَكَ. He said, did you bring us together for this? تَبًّا لَكَ. May you perish, may you be destroyed. Now you can imagine, crowds are there. And they're listening to Sayyidina Rasulullah Sallallahu Ta'ala Alaihi Waala calling people to Allah, telling them that he is a messenger of God. And his own uncle, who you would think would be there to defend him, is cursing him. But the Prophet Sallallahu Ta'ala Alaihi Waala doesn't need to respond on his own behalf. The Prophet Sallallahu Ta'ala Alaihi Waala has something much greater on his side. He has the Malaika, he has Sayyidina Jibreel, and greater than everything, he has Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala. And Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala reveals to the Prophet Sallallahu Ta'ala Alaihi Waala a surah that so many of us know. تبت يدا أبي لهب وتب ما أغنى عنه ماله وما كسب سيصلى نارا ذات لهب وامرأته حمالة الحطب في جيدها حبل من مسد. Look, Abu Lahab goes to insult the Prophet Sallallahu Ta'ala Alaihi Waala. He goes to harm the Prophet Sallallahu Ta'ala Alaihi Waala. And Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala unveils for all of eternity the haqiqah, the reality of who Abu Lahab and his wife are, who they will be, and where they will land. May the hands of Abu Lahab perish, and may he himself perish. Tabbat yada Abi Lahab wa tab. Abu Lahab dares say that to Sayyidina Rasulullah Sallallahu Ta'ala Alaihi Waala. You know who he is? He's the chosen one. He's the one that Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala sent as a mercy to all of the universes. He's the final messenger, alayhi salatu wasalam. He's the greatest of all messengers, sallallahu ta'ala alayhi wa ala alihi. He's the most humble of all of Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala's creation. He's the most upright of all of Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala's creation. You dare say those words about him? تبت يد أبي لهب وتب ما أغنى عنه ماله وما كسب. His wealth and everything that he's collected has benefited him nothing. It's brought him no avail. And then Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala tells us, سيصلى نارا ذات لهب. He will burn in a flaming fire. And so will his wife, the carrier of the thorny pricks. Around her neck will be a rope of palm fiber. So Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala reveals what is going to happen to Abu Lahab and his wife because of their adawa, because of their enmity, and because of their treachery to the Messenger of God Muhammad Sallallahu Ta'ala Alaihi wa ala alihi. Now Abu Lahab's wife, she was known in Quraysh as Jamil, the mother of beauty. And she was the sister of Abu Sufyan. And so Abu Lahab was married into a very powerful family. Abu Lahab was a rich man who came from a noble family, and he married into a wealthy family and what was known as a noble family of Quraysh. So why did he respond to the Prophet Sallallahu Ta'ala Alaihi wa ala alihi the way that he responded? Is because there are individuals in life that fear losing their proximity to power. You're going to see that there are individuals that will deny truth even though they know the truth to be the truth. Why? Because they fear losing power and access to power. Abu Lahab himself wasn't the most powerful man in Quraysh, but he had access to power. And some people become drunk on the access to power more so than they do on having the power itself, because they'll never get it. So you see there are people who are not famous, but they always want to hang out with famous people. We've seen this. They call this, I think, having a posse around you. You always see a famous celebrity, and then they have like 4 or 5 people around them. And because they're around that famous celebrity, they think that they're special. Well, Abu Lahab, he had that same sort of personality. Because now that he had access to power, he thought that he was powerful. And so when he heard his nephew, Sayyidina Rasulullah Sallallahu Ta'ala Alaihi Waala Alaihi, coming with something that was going to unseat how Quraysh saw and interpreted power, he wanted nothing to do with it. He wanted to put that flame out from the beginning because he wanted to continue in his seat of authority. And so he responds to the Prophet Sallallahu Ta'ala Alaihi Waala Alaihi in this way. But Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala, the King of authority, responds to him and tells him, you will be entering hellfire. Now, Abu Lahab's wife, as I mentioned to you, her name was Jamil. She became known as Qabih, the mother of ugliness. Her name was Jamil, the mother of beauty. The Prophet Sallallahu Ta'ala Alaihi Waala Alaihi and the companions transformed her name to the reality of who she was by changing it to the mother of ugliness. Why? Because she did everything that she could do to harm the Prophet Sallallahu Ta'ala Alaihi Waala Alaihi. See, there are some people who disbelieving is not enough for them. They don't want to just disbelieve. It's one thing not to believe in something, then you go on your merry way. But no, they were open enemies to the Prophet ﷺ. Abu Lahab used to follow the Prophet Sallallahu Ta'ala Alaihi Waala Alaihi around Mecca al-Mukarramah when the Prophet ﷺ used to make his da'wah and call people to Allah, and he used to tell everyone, don't listen to him. I'm his uncle, he's crazy. He would go out of his way to attempt to stop the Prophet Sallallahu Ta'ala Alaihi Waala Alaihi. Qabih, the wife of Abu Lahab, used to take thorns and put it in the walking place of the Prophet ﷺ so that if he stepped on them, those thorns would go into the skin of his blessed feet, Sallallahu Ta'ala Alaihi Waala Alaihi, and he was harmed. They were openly trying to harm him, ﷺ. And so when these ayat were revealed, people in Mecca used to start to repeat them. تبت يدا أبي لهب وتب ما أغنى عنه ماله وما كسب. Even the non-believers, because of the beauty of the words of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So that status that Abu Lahab and Qabih were chasing after with one surah of the Quran was completely destroyed. Oh, and that angered them so much. And all they had to do was believe. All they had to do was believe. But Allah revealed to us the reality of who they were, so they would never believe. And the stories of the Sira, they tell us that Sayyidina Rasulullah Sallallahu Ta'ala Alaihi Waala Alaihi, after these ayat were revealed, he was once sitting at the Kaaba with Sayyidina Abu Bakr as-Siddiq radiyallahu anhu arda. And who comes running towards Sayyidina Abu Bakr? It's Qabih, the wife of Abu Jahl. And Sayyidina Abu Bakr sees her coming from afar. And he says, "O Messenger of God, she's coming after you." And the Prophet Sallallahu Ta'ala Alaihi Waala Alaihi, not afraid whatsoever, standing strong. He says, she won't harm me. He says, she won't even see me. And he starts to read ayat, verses from the book of Allah Subhanahu Wa Ta'ala. And Qabih comes up to Sayyidina Abu Bakr, and Sayyidina Rasulullah Sallallahu Ta'ala Alaihi Waala Alaihi is sitting right there. She doesn't see him. And she says, "Where is your friend? I heard he composed verses about me. Where is your friend so I can hit him?" And she had a rock with her to throw at the Messenger of God Sallallahu Ta'ala Alaihi Waala Alaihi. And Sayyidina Abu Bakr says, in truth, he says, he didn't compose anything about you. It was Allah Subhanahu Wa Ta'ala who revealed Al-Quran Al-Kareem about her. And she takes off. And so Allah Subhanahu Wa Ta'ala protected our Messenger Sallallahu Ta'ala Alaihi Wa Ala Alih from the harm of Qabih when she tried to harm the Prophet Sallallahu Ta'ala Alaihi Wa Ala Alih. Now, 2 of the Prophet's daughters, alayhimus salam, were married to 2 of the sons of Abu Lahab. So you can imagine this now. Abu Lahab has 2 sons, Utbah wa Utayba. And they're married to daughters of the Prophet. Utbah is married to Sayyidatna Ruqayya. And Utayba is married to Sayyidatna Kulthum. And now you can imagine these ayat are revealed. The relationships are going sour. This is family, an uncle and his nephew, alayhi salatu wasalam, and cousins married to each other, and Abu Jahl in the darkness of his heart and the darkness of his wife's heart. And so he goes to his children, Utbah and Utayba, and he tells them, you and I will never speak to each other. We will never interact until you divorce the daughters of Muhammad ibn Abdullah Sallallahu Ta'ala Alaihi wa ala Alih, and Utbah and Utayba divorce the daughters of the Prophet Sallallahu Ta'ala Alaihi wa ala Alih. And they send them back to Sayyidina Rasulullah. So you can see now this phase of da'wah in open came at a cost. You're going to see that constantly in the life of the Prophet Sallallahu Ta'ala Alaihi wa ala Alih, he experienced pain. He experienced suffering. Those that loved him, those that were closest to him, Sallallahu Ta'ala Alaihi wa ala Ali, they experienced that pain and suffering as well. But that pain and suffering was nothing compared to the treasure of believing in Allah and His Messenger, Sallallahu Ta'ala Alaihi wa ala Ali. Now, Abu Lahab also had a daughter. Her name was Ad-Durrah or Durrah. And Durrah becomes a believer. وهاجرت إلى مدينة المنورة at the time of the Hijrah. And so he had two sons who died on disbelief, and then he had a daughter by the name of Durrah, who was a beautiful woman, as the books of the Sira tell us, who saw truth as truth, and she expressed it and believed in La ilaha illallah Muhammadur Rasulullah. Now something interesting happens here. Ad-Durrah, when she travels to Al-Madina al-Munawwara, we're fast forwarding in time just a little bit, some of the people of Al-Madina start to insult her. And they start to say, are you the daughter of Abu Lahab? Are you the daughter of the one that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala revealed ayat of Quran about, that he's going to be burning in hell? You can imagine, Ad-Durrah, this is her dad, this is her mom. It's hurtful, even though she knew it was true. And she went to the Prophet Sallallahu Ta'ala Alaihi wa ala Alih, and she complained that people are saying such and such about her. And the Prophet Sallallahu Ta'ala Alaihi wa ala Alih didn't stand for that behavior. And he Sallallahu Ta'ala Alaihi wa ala Alih one day, as narrated to us in the books of Seerah and Hadith, he stood up on the minbar and he said, what is with people who are hurting me by hurting my family? من آذى أهلي فقد آذاني. Whomsoever hurts my family has hurt me. ومن آذاني فقد آذى الله. And whoever hurts me has transgressed against Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Warning everyone to be careful about what they say in harm of others, and in particular the family of Sayyidina Rasulullah Sallallahu Ta'ala Alaihi wa ala Alih. Now the Prophet Sallallahu Ta'ala Alaihi wa ala Alih continues in his da'wah, Sallallahu Ta'ala Alaihi wa ala Alih. And another ayah is revealed to him, Sallallahu Ta'ala Alaihi wa ala Alih, وَأَنذِرْ عَشِيرَتَكَ الْأَقْرَبِينَ. Warn your close family members. So the Prophet Sallallahu Ta'ala Alaihi wa ala Alih gathers all of his family, his uncles and his cousins, and he with his own blessed hands, Sallallahu Ta'ala Alaihi wa ala Ali, he makes for them food. And who's there amongst them? Abu Lahab. Abu Lahab's there. And the Prophet Sallallahu Ta'ala Alaihi wa ala Ali is about to speak, about to invite them all collectively to Islam. And who ruins it again? Abu Lahab. He says, Ya Muhammad, if you're here to talk to us about this religion of yours, we don't want to hear anything about it. And so the Prophet Sallallahu Ta'ala Alaihi wa ala Ali keeps quiet. Doesn't say anything. He lets everyone eat and they all go. He invites them all a second time. Sallallahu Ta'ala Alaihi wa ala Ali. But this time, he doesn't bring Abu Lahab into his home. Sallallahu Ta'ala Alaihi wa ala Ali. And he tells everyone around them. You can imagine, if you have something good, who do you want to partake in it the most? Your family. You want your family to be on this path. And the Prophet Sallallahu Ta'ala Alaihi wa Alaihi tells them, he swears that he is a messenger of God to them specifically and to all creation in general. And he tells them something that wallahi, you and I need to hear in this day and age as well. And he tells them, by Allah, you will die just like you sleep. These are the words of Sayyidina Rasulullah Sallallahu Ta'ala Alaihi wa Alaihi, just telling his family, but telling you and I the realities of life. He says, by Allah, you will die just like you sleep. And by Allah, you will be resurrected just like you wake. You will be taken account for your actions, rewarded for your good with good, and repaid for your wickedness with wickedness. This is the reality of life. This is the reality of all existence, that one day we will all die. Everything that we're experiencing now will come to an end. And the akhirah will be made apparent for us just like it is when we wake up. It's like a short slumber. But that's when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala takes us into hisab. He takes us into account. And so the Prophet Sallallahu Ta'ala Alaihi wa Alaihi is telling his family, and in turn he's telling you and I, do good, work for the akhirah. This life is not it. You will be with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And there's no amal, there's no actions on that during that time. There's no actions in the resurrection. It's just hisab, it's just accountability. So let's take ourselves into account now before Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala takes us into account then. And everyone around him, from his family, they speak well, they say good. Some of them become Muslim. And Abu Talib promises the Prophet Sallallahu Ta'ala Alaihi wa Alaihi that he is free to give his da'wah and that he will provide him protection. And so you see the reaction of Abu Lahab to Sayyidina Rasulullah Sallallahu Ta'ala Alaihi wa Alaihi, his vile responses to the Prophet Sallallahu Ta'ala Alaihi wa Alaihi, and how he interacted with him. And then you see Abu Talib, who doesn't believe. He didn't take his shahada, but still with that, he says, you came with something beautiful, and we will provide you protection as you call to that which you are calling to. So now the Prophet Sallallahu Ta'ala Alaihi wa Alaihi has the protection of Abu Talib and is able to go out openly and even with further strength in calling people to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala guide our hearts to the love of the Prophet ﷺ, to act the way that he acted, sallallahu ta'ala alayhi wa ala alihi, and be the way that he was, sallallahu ta'ala alayhi wa ala alihi. We're going to see, inshallah, in our next conversation, the response of Quraysh and the response of those that attacked the Prophet ﷺ and attacked the early believers, and how Sayyidina Rasulullah sallallahu ta'ala alayhi wa ala alihi dealt with it. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.